Check, 1, 2. All right, Fumble Podcast. What's up, Fumble fans? This is episode 47. I am your host, Pej. You know where to find me, Pej the Maniac, on Snapchat, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and of course, follow me on and subscribe to Fumble Podcast on my YouTube channel under the same name. And hit that notification bell so you don't miss any future Pej the Maniac or Fumble content. All right. I have a good friend on this week. And let me tell you a little bit about him. He's a deputy with the California Sheriff's Department. He's been there for 5 years now. And previous to that, he was in the Army as a military police. And more importantly than that, he's my good friend Lee. How you doing, bud?
Pretty good. Hi.
Cool. Thanks for coming on. We just want to talk about policing today a little bit, and just wanted to kind of dig your brain on what made you fall in love with that field and your time in the Army, and what influenced you to get into that, and eventually now being in the Sheriff's Department. So what do you got? What do you what is that what you wanted to do always as a kid, or what?
No, actually, growing up, I never really aspired to be, in law enforcement or anything. I actually had originally wanted to be a history professor, odd kid who wanted to be a history professor.
Yeah.
But when I joined the Army, I sort of on a whim picked the military police just because I wanted a job that kind of kept me busy while I was in the Army, because I know, if the infantry aren't in combat, they're mowing lawns, and, when you get people who are, intel or whatever, and they go to combat, they're kind of lost and confused. So I picked a job that just does something everywhere. And then I actually enjoyed the law enforcement side of it. I enjoyed doing patrol work. I got lucky enough to not be a gate guard like a lot of military police are, and got to do some, interesting stuff in the various different places the Army sent me over 5 years.
Whoa, no way. That's cool, man. I know you got some crazy stories from your military days, but we'll leave that for another episode. But today, so from the Army, so when did you leave the Army?
I left the Army in 2013.
All right, 2013. All right, nice. And then at what point, so did you come straight back to California, or did you go elsewhere?
Yeah, after the Army, I came back to California.
Yeah. And then you when did you go into preparing to be a police officer?
Academy for my department in 2016.
Oh, nice. Okay. Very good. So now it's been 5 years, like you said, that you've been in the Sheriff's Department. And I guess I want to know about some of the more lighter topics. Obviously, I don't want to get too deep into the topic of police stereotypes and culture, but I kind of just want to know what is the culture right now as a police officer? What is like the normal accepted culture in your department, for example?
Honestly, that's a hard question to answer without getting more deep.
Go as deep as you deem necessary.
Yeah, well, law enforcement culture. The best way I can describe law enforcement is sort of like, everyone has sort of a place in society, and the law enforcement draw from two crowds. One, the group of people who just want to help people. They're really into, they had a dream of like, I want to save people, I want to protect people, I want to help people. And then the other group is sort of the facet of society who is the keepers of order and structure. They're people who feel that, the status quo must be maintained or society will fall apart. And some people, of course, fall into both sides of that. But that's generally like the type of people who go into law enforcement. That does tend to lend toward much more conservative values, much more right-wing thinking, because that's the like we must preserve the past kind of attitude,
Right, right.
maintain the status quo. So generally speaking, most law enforcement people are not very progressive. They're, much more along the conservative, maintain order and structure and such lines.
I got you. So where do you see yourself on that line? Do you see yourself more conservative on that end, or more liberal, or where?
As far as law enforcement goes, I would be considered a liberal.
Okay.
However, living in California, I'm usually seen as a conservative.
Everyone's conservative in Californians' eyes, but I get that. I get that. How is that? How is that though? Being in the force yourself, and you considering yourself a liberal.
So it's something that usually is not any issue at work or anything. It's not like you sit around and have vast intellectual debates about politics or anything while we're trying to do a job. It does lend to there are certain people at my work who I personally do not engage with socially because their beliefs or my beliefs just don't line up. But that's very few and far between. Generally speaking, I work with a very pleasant group of people who I get along quite well with.
That's good. And I feel like it takes like a level of maturity though to be able to do that. What you just said is to just understand there's different values with some coworkers, and then just leaving that at work and just being at peace with not having a social life outside of work. I don't think everybody could do that. I feel like I might struggle with that myself. I'm very passionate, as you know, about a lot of my own thoughts and topics. So I feel like I would want to scratch the surface of people's thoughts and ideas on things. Yeah. But then again, that's probably a good thing that I'm not in law enforcement. But so what is a regular day for you of work, like as far as because I know you used to work night shifts, and I hear that's not the case anymore, which is, I guess that's an improvement, right?
I'm currently assigned to the jail in my county and work day shifts. So, I work a 12-hour day. I'm there and in uniform, ready to go at 6 a.m., taking over whatever position I'm assigned to that day. And then it's managing inmates' lives for the day. We're calling them out to send them to court. We're, managing them, making sure they're getting their meals, making sure, their areas are getting cleaned, maintained, making sure no one's fighting each other, going through just these processes of managing a facility that houses a lot of people.
Is that what you expected going into it?
Actually, no. Because when I was, military police, I did patrol work. And when I, went to the academy, of course, when you're thinking police, deputy, all that stuff, you're thinking, okay, I'm going to go be a patrol. I'm going to go out and chase bad guys, and I'm going to car pursuits and stuff like that. But the department I currently work for, when you finish the academy, you do a stint in the jail. And I actually wound up discovering that the way the jail I work at is run, I actually enjoy working there, which paired with I enjoy training new deputies. And because when they're beginning their career, it's in the jail. And once you spend 2-3 years working in that facility and kind of becoming part of the culture, and then you go out to patrol, you're sort of established who you're going to be as an officer for the next many years of your career. So like the training officers at the very beginning, they're in the jail. They're the ones who can really help establish, for lack of a better term, good values. Work ethic, partner etiquettes, and all kinds of stuff like that into these new people who are fresh out of the academy. And even though they're new to us, they vary in age from 20 years old up to 45 years old, depending on what age they decided to go into law enforcement.
Yeah. I I think that's a good thing, right? It's as far as the evolution of the force and everything, it's leaning more towards progressive thinking, which is, I think it's good. You don't have to comment on that if you don't want, but I just feel like it's I think we need that. What is the uh is there a lot of old heads still in the force, or is there are they becoming younger and younger as the
I mean, law enforcement is kind of a younger field than most fields are, just because, cops tend to retire between 50 and 55 years of age.
Oh
Uh,
wow, I didn't
so,
know that. Okay.
uh, and part of that's just because it is a very physical job.
Right.
So you can't keep chasing bad guys or fighting bad guys until you're, 70. It just
Yeah.
doesn't well. Um, and there's only so many admin positions and administrative stuff and desk jobs and stuff there are in law enforcement. So you wind up with between the way that police pensions are designed, and part of that being because of the type of job it is. Most police tend to retire. Police deputies, state troopers, all that tend to retire between 50 and 55 years of age. Though it's not uncommon for them to come back as kind of part-time fill-in positions when they're needed for an
Yeah.
extra 5 to 10 years after that.
Yeah. So what does a part-time look like? Do they go into more of administrative role, or how does that work?
It can be various different administrative roles. I know at the facility I work in, we have some individuals, they call them retired annuitants. They're, retired, but they still work a day here and there.
Yeah.
And they'll do jobs where, we've got worker inmates who they'll escort through the building. These are inmates who are very low security. They've earned themselves a position as a worker, which helps reduce their time in jail, as well as is necessary for the function of the facility.
Yeah.
So we'll have these older deputies escorting them for, taking out trash or cleaning different areas, or, areas where, an inmate would have to be supervised.
I understand. Okay. All right. Um, I guess an important topic I always want to ask about with any guest I've had on here with their line of work is mental health. How is the uh, idea of mental health approached by the academy, and is it do you see it now that you've been in it for a good chunk of time? Do you
So
see it being an issue?
mental health is actually a big thing in law enforcement because of, the things that cops wind up seeing and dealing with, and
Right.
working with people who don't like us the majority of the time, many of who have intent to do harm to us as well. And you add that with, unfortunately, some of the old-fashioned values and views that are still maintained by, luckily at this point, a smaller number, but still a number of people in law enforcement that are, not seeking help, just hide it all, just, the like tough through it with everything, no matter how bad things are. It was maybe last year I actually had another deputy, and he's a little older but not old.
Mhm.
Tell me, like, oh God, like, make sure you don't use the department's new mental health app that they came out with, because they're going to track you and they might take away your gun. And
Oh.
I made it very clear to him what my opinion of that was, because our department, in my department's case, developed an actual app for your phone that you can log on to. You can seek therapy, you can seek counseling, you can just find another, deputy who's willing to just sit down with you and chat about stuff you've seen and dealt with.
Yeah.
um, and it's all confidential through this app.
Right.
That
Right.
way
Right.
feel safe to reach out to someone, in case they don't feel comfortable reaching out for like a therapist or someone on the outside of law enforcement. Um, and it also has just little tests and quizzes and programs and stuff to be able to sort of judge where you're at mentally. Um,
Yeah.
so that gives a good idea that, the departments and like the California Post is what it's called, Police Officer Standards of Training,
Hmm.
um, has done a lot in the last, honestly, over the last decade to 2 decades. It's a fairly new thing, but they've done a lot to try to promote mental health within law enforcement.
Yeah.
Um, One of the biggest problems within law enforcement was people becoming burned out, which creates a danger to themselves and the general public.
Mm.
Um, Becoming jaded and angry, which creates a danger to themselves and the general public, and people getting so mentally distraught that suicide became a huge problem.
Wow. What?
And
Yeah.
you don't
The-
want cops, being out there in a suicidal state, but scared to go talk to someone.
Right.
They've dealt with so much trauma that they've been already so scared to go talk to someone about.
Yeah, that is well, I mean, that's a huge step forward though with this app you're talking about. And um how old is this implementation of this app? How is it a recent, or and was there a program in place before this app came into play?
Programs in place. Various different departments have different organizations within them, often something called like peer support, which are other officers in your department who've been sent to sort of like counseling schools. And they wear a badge identifying them as someone that you can go talk to confidentially if you just need an ear to listen. So it's not terribly new for departments to have started these programs.
Yeah.
Fortunately, it is something that older officers, because of the cultures they were brought up under and
Mhm.
these school mentalities that are residual from a long time ago, a lot of people still are somewhat resistant or hesitant or scared to deal with. um, and there is a legitimate concern in departments with certain types of management where you're worried that, like, oh well, if they hear I'm talking to a therapist, maybe they'll be scared that I'm not safe to carry a gun, and then you're off work, because if you're deemed unsafe or mentally unfit or anything like that, you're
Yeah.
just put out of work. So there
Yeah.
is some fear there. Luckily, it's a mostly unfounded fear nowadays. um,
Oh.
there's going to be some small town departments or rural areas where there's some guy who's been the local sheriff or the local police chief for the last 40 years and has a very old school mindset, but that is becoming less and less common.
All right. So it seems that for all intents and purposes, uh, it looks like culturally and also um, just with programs and systematically, I think it's progressing to a more modern way of approach as far as law enforcement is based on what you're telling me. So that's
And stuff, it certainly has come a long way from even what I've had officers who have told me 20 years ago, if you even said I feel depressed, people would have been like, oh my god. um,
oh wow.
and it has definitely come a long way in the last 10-20 years.
I mean, I would say that that's pretty common even outside the force. I mean, the whole entire idea of mental health has been taboo for years, right? And then only in the Western world, it's more they're more open minds about it now. But I think in where I grew up in the East, it's even less of a thing where I grew up, right? It was considered it was almost looked at as a weakness, right? As opposed to like a real issue that needs medical attention.
Right.
So,
Yeah, they see it as a sickness. They see it as a sign of weakness in you.
right, right. So, um, do you see yourself being in this specific department as long as you are practicing law enforcement?
I expect to, yeah. The
Yeah.
workforce is pretty good sized, and what I like about that is that it has lots of opportunity to go to various different positions and other things. So if I do ever get sick of where I'm working, I can always just transfer to another area within the department.
That's cool, man. That's cool.
I'll
Um,
hear my dogs in the background there.
oh, it's okay, man. No worries. My dog barked too in the beginning. What's the is there any hazing system in law enforcement? Like
Uh,
when you're first getting on, or like as like looked at as a rookie maybe, or
well, I was hazed extensively in the military, so I've become very against hazing.
right.
And as the training officers, I regularly am making sure there's not hazing going on around me. But I can't say it's gone, unfortunately.
Yeah.
There are people, and it tends to be individuals. You'll have a handful of people here, a handful of people there, who
Yeah.
are trying to implement these hazing rituals or whatever. And a lot of the time, it comes down to something like, I went through this in the Marine Corps, or my dad, who was a cop, told me this is what happened to him when he joined the
Yeah.
department.
Yeah.
um, So a lot of people, it's, based upon something else either they've been through or that they were told people go through. Um, but it's pretty uncommon, and there's massive amounts of laws and regulations saying that you cannot haze people.
Well,
So
great.
when
Yeah.
it's identified, or especially if something happens that's harassment,
Yeah.
it is pretty quickly nixed by our leadership, because very, very little of our actual leadership is tolerant of it.
Is it can it lead to termination if caught?
It can. I can't think of a case, at least not with this department since I've been here, where it's been let go even farther enough to lead to termination.
Okay. Well,
Um,
I guess that's good. But I mean, I wonder how, like, if there is like a 3-strike law or something like that, maybe.
Different administrative policies about, you receive the documented counselings and other things like that, and we are government employees, so unfortunately we are difficult to let go.
Yeah.
Which, in many cases is great job protection, but unfortunately in some cases also keeps people who probably shouldn't still be around lingering.
Yeah.
You can document a history of behavioral problems or failure to do your job right. People can be let go, and I've definitely seen people let go from the department for those sorts of things.
Yeah. I
And
guess
when
that kind of ties into mental health too. Like people who are the hazers, like they probably have been through something themselves, like you were mentioning, or they've been like, uh, told by people they looked up to, either their dad or uncle or someone else who's been in the military or law enforcement or military. And yeah, I mean, I think it's all relative at the end of the day.
Mhm.
So all right, let's end on some light notes. What are some fun stereotypes that are out there about cops, as far as the fun ones? All right, we'll just stick to the fun ones. Like,
uh,
let's start with donuts. Do cops actually enjoy donuts?
Actually, I know the history of why cops have the donut stereotype.
All right, tell us.
So back in the 1950s and 60s, we didn't have police radios in the cars.
Uh,
We just have radios that you could put in a car and function. They didn't start coming in until during the 60s.
hmm.
So police needed to actually find a phone to contact dispatch and be like, hey, is anything going on? And the only places that were open in the middle of the night, restaurants and diners all closed down by midnight, 1 a.m. But donut shops open up at like 1 in the morning because they're baking, because they want all their donuts ready by 5 a.m., 6 a.m. So
Yeah.
cops actually hang out at donut shops because it was warm, it had a restroom, it had a phone. And back
Oh.
wasn't much in the way of like 24-hour establishments. So officers would hang out there. So you'd wind up seeing like, a group of squad cars sitting in front of a donut shop. And most likely they were enjoying some donuts while they were there. That was how they were, paying for the service and use of the facility. But that's actually where that donut stereotype comes from.
All right, I see. I didn't know that, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners didn't know that. So, um, but how did that change after the radios were included in the police cars? Did
Um,
it change?
I think everyone likes donuts, truthfully. I don't think cops eat more than anyone else. Um,
Okay.
will say though that what I've seen recently is a massive switch over to bagels.
Oh,
I've seen a lot of officers going to bagel places and having bagels and other things, but that doesn't stop us from at least once a month. I see someone walking into work with a 2 dozen box of donuts. So there are definitely still officers who enjoy their donuts.
what else is there that maybe isn't as widely talked about that the average cop enjoys?
Um, I mean, everyone knows the connection cops and coffee and stuff, but I think
Yeah.
that's due to just we work weird shifts and long hours. Of course, we
Yeah.
drink a lot of coffee, and nowadays a lot of people are also drinking a lot of energy drinks. Um,
The modernized way. So
yeah,
I'm assuming there's a lot of cops you see at Starbucks or the regular coffee chains.
probably.
What's your go-to coffee though? Like when you're waking up at 4 a.m., 5 a.m. to go to work, or when?
We have a coffee maker at home. I'm cheap, so I just make it to work with me.
Yeah, yeah, I got you. But what about at the place you're at? Is do they have coffee there, or do you see people bringing in coffee?
Fancy new machine they put in about 6 months ago that's a vending machine for coffee.
Oh,
different drinks in it. It has, espressos and Americanos and, mochas, and it can do cold or hot beverages, all kinds of things. So
There you
we
go.
have a coffee fancy vending machine at work now.
The next thing you need is a donut vending machine, I think. Then you don't have to go to the coffee shops or the donut shops. I'm sure the donut shop owners are gonna veto that, but that's funny, man. I'm not gonna lie. The first time I saw Lee and he wasn't even a cop yet, I was like, that dude looks like a cop. And he just fit to me, he just fit the role. And I've had other friends of Caucasian nature that also I thought were cops, but they weren't. But this one was. So it ended up happening that and he's a good one at it. So we want that to be the case for, and hopefully with all the administrative changes that you mentioned that are in place and continuing to modernize, hopefully that we hear less negative stories about the police, because I think the police are needed, and I think they're there for our protection, and the system, I think, is slowly shifting, and I think I credit that to social media, in my opinion, and I think it's starting to force some policy changes, not just in law enforcement, but in a lot of fields that were run by potentially toxic people up top. And I feel like that's kind of made companies, for example, Uber. I mean, I heard about Uber 7-8 years ago and how they were corrupt, and it was a really horrible place, and they were misogynistic in nature, and it was really ugly. And they but again, social media, it spread that news so fast that Uber was caught with their hands almost like out, like, oh shit, we need to fix this. And luckily and fortunately, it forced them to do that. And so I'm very for social media when it's used properly to spread good, and to also spread the bad news, to be forced to be good, if that makes sense, to kind of change the cultures. So let's finish on that. What are your thoughts on social media and how it has affected law enforcement?
So I think, like you said, there's been a lot of sort of forcing people to acknowledge that there are flaws in the systems, both law enforcement and the justice system and the government at large.
Mm-hmm.
The unfortunate side with that is, so much of the time when people want to point at the problems, they want to point at the police, because we are the visible arm of the government. We are the enforcement arm of the government. So it makes it very easy when there's government problems and legal problems and stuff to point at the cops and say they're the issue.
Yeah.
So overall, social media has definitely forced a improvement in policies, in actions, in all kinds of things. I mean, the huge movements last year after George Floyd's murder just shows how much social media can be used to get people moving and get people motivated, because those protests, they were global. They were not just in a region or just a nation.
Yeah.
Those were happening across the world.
Yeah.
And policies were changed. I mean, within weeks of George Floyd's murder, there were changes in policies in my own department. And being a California department, we already had much higher standards and stuff than most departments around the nation.
Yeah.
California has a very high post,
Mhm.
like standards in their post, their police officer standards of training.
Mhm.
But on the other side of that, unfortunately, also social media sometimes makes it easy to spread misinformation.
That's true. That's true.
It's easy to take a video and cut it down to a 3-second shot
Yeah.
and be like, look how horrible this event was.
Yeah.
Or look how amazing this event was, by cutting another 3 seconds from that video. And now you've got two different groups playing those two different segments and telling their own story about
Yeah.
this big thing that probably had both good and bad in it.
Yeah, that's true. I agree with you, but I also feel though, I think well, my stance on all that is all gonna filter out over time, right? It's unfortunate that
Yeah.
people don't do their own research, right?
Mhm.
People don't actually look at the facts, or as soon as there's a emotional connection to a story, people will jump all over it, or they
Right.
tend to, right?
They tend to go over what they already wanted to believe too.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, not to, I don't want to get into the whole political side of COVID, but like it's become a circus show now, right? It's become like,
Got involved.
yeah. As
Yeah.
soon as, but again, I believe even that, like, um, there are social media outlets that are spreading information that isn't well researched, but they are big enough names, and I'm not going to bring their names up here, but they're big enough names where people are kind of looking at them like as like a cult following. And as a
Mhm.
result, what happens? That becomes their uh medical research, which is, to me, it's
Well, and
we
I
have.
have a great personal example of how people can be sort of radicalized by a a misgiving within a group. For
Yeah,
example, last year during the protests following George Floyd's murder, um, it was a mass call for police reform. They were
yeah,
saying police need to be held to a higher standard, they need to be held accountable, and they need to get better. And even most cops would agree with that if you just asked them that in a general sense.
yeah,
I can't think of any that I personally know who would actually disagree with that.
right.
However, when you wind up with a large protest of over 500 people standing outside the building that I worked in, and the entire crowd is chanting "Kill all cops,"
Yeah,
it becomes very difficult for the police in that building to now differentiate between a crowd that got too worked up by someone who was rabble rousing and trying to get it up here when it
yep,
should have been protest. um, and so now you get these other group, in this case law enforcement, going into this defensive mode and
yes,
being like, oh god, well, now we need to resist everything these people tell us
right,
because we hear them chanting that outside of our building. When
yeah.
in reality, if you were to interview those people in that crowd, I bet 99% of them would have been like, no, no, I don't want to kill any cops. I just want police to be accountable and do better.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, and it's again, I think with peaceful protests, and the emphasis has to be on peaceful, and also the social media protest, I think all of that, with time, and it takes time, I think mental evolution, and then eventually procedural evolution is gonna it has to take time, because I think humanity is so diverse in with and the fact that emotions can can taint the truth from what what is uh advertised as the truth. Mix that in with media, which is a business at the end of the day, and they make money off of a lot of this shit, so
Mhm.
that ends up becoming corrupt. So then what happens is so now I differentiate social media with media, because social media is at the control of all of our fingertips, right? We can control that narrative. If I don't like a news that either I don't agree with, or I don't think it's true, or I've researched and it's not true, I just say, I can click on it and say, notify me less about this, right? So that's how you can eventually filter out, right? If we're all eventually, we all have to lean back on our responsible side as human beings, um, and we have to think, what do we want at the end of the day? Like, and I always say this, on all my posts that are either negative news, or news that I want something to be changed about. I always say, purify the mind, because there's nothing, or purify the world we live in, because there's nothing more more on the basis of all human beings than the pure side we had as kids. And I feel like if we're thinking like we were as children, and I work with children. I see how they look at, for example, we just had Martin Luther King Jr. Day, right? MLK Day, and we were teaching that to the kids, and the kids are like, why do we talk about color? What is the point? I mean, we're all friends. And it's like, isn't that so simple? But yet, as adults, we actually go backwards a lot of times because we let experience and emotions again, or false information, give us a very false version of the truth. So again, that's why, again, I think social media eventually will become more and more purified, and it'll eventually, through the control of the people who actually want positive change, and in combination with what we were talking about earlier, mental health, I think all of that together is I'm hopeful that it's getting better.
Believe that overall it definitely is. There's definitely a overall positive shift going on. But I also think that the danger side of social media is, like you said, with the ability to say, show me less of this.
Yeah.
It does also have the risk that some people put themselves in a reverberation chamber. They pick a very finite group of beliefs that they want to hear,
Yeah.
and they subscribe to all those different groups that say those things,
Yeah.
and block everyone else who says anything else. And now they're in their little reverberation chamber, and they become more extreme in whatever direction they are. But I think
Yeah.
many people don't fall into that. I think that's, luckily a smaller group of people on both sides, and the various different spectrums there are,
Right.
politically and socially. But there are
I,
going to that danger as well.
there's always going to be a number that is of humans that are going to go against what makes sense, right?
You're going to
What
find a way to radical, become extreme in whatever view it is that they're choosing to go that far with.
Right. But I'm not sitting here speaking delusionally and saying that every human being is going to eventually become, you know what I mean? But I just think enough people are going to start waking up with research, proper research, and social media is starting to get cleaner and cleaner. And I mean, Twitter's already doing this, right? Twitter is starting to fact check anybody from former president to to me, who's a nobody right now. So, and I say right now because I'm gonna blow up, baby. but no, I'm just saying, like, they'll fact check you. Like, they got people checking and making sure everything that is said. Now, the naysayers are going to say, well, who are they to fact check? What do they know? So that becomes a whole other topic of discussion. But I think we follow, if you follow everything with a pure intent, how we've looked at things as kids, as babies, I think it helps out in a lot of these different topics that we talk about. I want to finish this podcast by talking about that Pikachu up there. That is a Pikachu, I believe.
That is
It is, or it isn't?
It is. It's Raichu, not Pikachu.
Oh shoot, I got it wrong. Raichu. All right, let's talk some anime. That's and that's a gaming hard drive you got up there, right?
Yeah, that was actually my Christmas present from my wife and myself to myself.
Hey, nice. I've been very entertained by the light show I've been seeing this whole episode. So
that was the time I've ever actually just bought components and built my own computer.
Nice.
So
must be fast as shit.
Megan, I had mounted up on the wall where the lights are actually visible, because before, when I first put it together, it was behind this big monitor.
Oh, so you can see it. There you go. Now you're flexing, so that's cool. But that's cool, man. What's your go-to PC game?
At the moment, I'm playing through the Mass Effect Legendary Edition that came out earlier last year.
Okay, all right.
Old games, the old Mass Effect games. So playing through the Legendary remaster of them is pretty fun.
Nice, awesome. All right. Well, Lee, thank you so much for getting on. I know you actually were working today, so you must be tired. I will let you go rest. And I believe my wife is at your house right now.
Yes.
And
They
for
came-
all
Dogs barking while we were talking was when they came back in.
look at that. Now, our queens, our significant others, are close friends, so no one get wrong ideas as why my wife is at Lee's house. But other than that, you enjoy that. I'm gonna go get something to eat. I'm sure you're hungry too, so you go get some food. And this has been episode 47. My good friend Officer Lee, I just call him Lee, because that's a lot to say every time I see him. Officer Lee, that's too much, and I hope he doesn't expect that. But but yeah, this has been episode 47. Make sure you follow me, Pej the Maniac, on all the platforms that are here now on the screen, as well as Phumblepodcast on my YouTube. And you can now catch the videos. If you haven't heard already, you can catch the videos on YouTube and Spotify. So there you go. And audios on all other podcast platforms. Thank you for listening, and I'll catch you on the next one.